I don't come on this podcast, throwing stones from a glass house. Our industry has its own problems too.
How common is a third-party style breach where you may not have done anything wrong?
The cyber criminals have looked at that and said, well, why are we wasting our time trying to attack people's systems directly? Make friends with a cyber lawyer. Sorry to be selfish here, but I have to put that in. We're not that bad, are we?
Welcome to Time Well Spent, the podcast for decision makers, providers, and everyone working to make a difference in care. I'm Dane Mitchell, joined by my co-host, Rose Plater.
Together, we bring 31 years of combined experience and still counting, and a shared passion for reimagining aged care and community health. From policy and reform to leadership, culture, and connection, this is where we explore new ideas, hear what leaders really think, and uncover what it takes to create environments where time is truly well spent.
Looking well today, mate.
Thanks, Dad.
Did you arrive in the Ferrari?
Reece, welcome to Time Well Spent.
Thanks, Dane.
Mate, you're a lawyer and you run your own cybersecurity and incident response firm. So for people like us who don't live in this world every day, although I have had a unpleasant experience, when we talk about a data breach or a cyber incident, what does that actually mean, and how does that usually begin inside an organisation?
So we deal with a lot of incidents every year. We collect a lot of data about the types of incidents that we deal with. The easiest way to explain it is probably by explaining the different types of events. So we all know what ransomware is. It's where someone gets in and steals your data and locks up your systems. We've heard of lots of different incidents in the headlines, Medibank, and others that have gone through that. And I think for a lot of small businesses, they think that that's kind of out of sight, out of mind, wouldn't happen to them. And I want to come back to that theme in a moment, but that is a very common incident type that we deal with. A lot of these incidents are cyber criminals just trying to make money. They're not running around the streets anymore and breaking in and stealing jewelry. They're actually online and ultimately financially motivated. But it's also very simple incidents. So we deal with lots of human error, people sending emails to the wrong person, losing documents, losing USBs, losing laptops. There's lots and lots of different types. But fundamentally, you ask the question, how does this happen? It's people clicking on dodgy links, not realizing that they've been phished. It's not updating software, so allowing criminals to break in. There's a whole bunch of different ways in which this happens, and happy to talk a bit more.
And just for, someone with limited technical knowledge like myself, what's phishing?
So it's where a cyber criminal tries to trick you into clicking on a link, ultimately to convince you that they're a legitimate person. They either want your money or they want your login credentials. They really want you to do something. And if you're sitting there bashing through, 100, 200, 300 emails a day and you're not able to spot this, then that's really giving the threat actor or the cyber criminal a way into your environment by clicking on that.
Now, aged care and NDIS are now what seems like high-value clients. Is there a reason for this to be attractive?
There's a probably misconception that, and when we speak to clients, they get hit. The very first question is, why us? Why are they targeting us? What do we do wrong?
That feels familiar.
It does. We will. And I think the honest answer is they're not actually going for you. They're going for your systems. And very often they're not targeting any one particular organization. They're quite literally scanning the internet to see if there's any systems that are vulnerable and breaking in. And it's actually not until they get in that they themselves actually realize who they've actually hit. So I think the first answer to your question is don't take it personally. They are here just trying to find a way into systems. But then that said, the aged care sector, as you'll appreciate, there's lots of different reasons why they might find you interesting. The data that you hold, the information that you process, the clients that you have, the personalities of the individuals. This all creates value for these criminals. This creates something that they can ultimately leverage if they wanted to try to extort you, say, for example, in relation to that event.
So what you're saying is that the data that aged care and NDIS providers hold has value, basically. But is that value because of they understand the cost of dealing with, say, the privacy regulator, so therefore it creates pressure, or are they actually able to sell that data and use it?
Both. So they know that, and when you look at all the different stats, we know that healthcare breaches are the most costly to deal with because of the privacy elements because of the fact you have to assess the data, you have to notify individuals, you have to, deal with regulators. And so they know.
And all healthcare data is considered high risk, right?
Exactly. It's probably the most sensitive data type that exists. But then to your point, there is actual value in the data itself. So driver's licenses, bank accounts, etc., you can use to obviously sell to other criminals. But health data itself, it helps build profiles about individuals, and it really helps criminals ultimately conduct further attacks. So there's both currency in the data itself, but also value in the extortion or the leverage in attacking you as a healthcare service provider.
The answer is both, right?
Both.
So when a breach happens, whether it's ransomware or stolen data, what does the first 24 hours really look like?
You can ask me that, but go on.
It depends how prepared you are is probably the short answer, right? What we see a lot of organizations...
Not very.
not very. What we see a lot of organizations do is panic, right? And understandably so. They are probably looking at their computers being shut down, or there's lots of alerting going off, or there's data, in your case, that's been published online, and the first thing that you hear is a media outlet contacting you saying, are you even aware of this having occurred? And so, again, comes down to your preparedness. But I think the short answer is a lot of people make really critical mistakes in the first 24 to 72 hours.
Yeah.
They're probably, not stopping the attack where they have opportunities to shut it down. They're not engaging with external service providers that can help them. They're not calling their insurers if they've got insurance. They're not doing the things that will set them up for success. And so probably the big takeaway in all of this is if you're not crisis conditioned, if you're not practicing this or just thinking about what you would do in the first 24 hours, it can feel really, really unsettling.
For an aged care provider or NDIS provider or allied health provider listening to this, what does good crisis response in the immediate aftermath of a notification that you've got a problem, what does that look like? For me, when we went through that, I was at the rugby watching my son play footy and very stressed on the sideline going, well, what is this? What I don't...
Is this a joke?
Yeah, it was a very much a response of, well, what comes next?
Often the incident will kind of start in the IT team, and understandably so, because they're the ones that are sitting there monitoring the networks. Good looks like getting the IT team to escalate it to the senior leadership. Now, whether that's a small business owner, whether that's for larger organizations, the crisis management team, because it's not just the IT issue. It's, as you know, everything else that matters. It's having to actually contain the breach. It's having to report to regulators, report to customers, all of these things that the IT team isn't responsible for. So the biggest lesson I learned with all this is get it out of the IT team to manage the incident and ensure that those people understand their roles and their responsibilities. I think the short answer is that if you as an organization don't have the internal resources to be able to deal with this, you're going to need outside help. And knowing who to call, knowing where to get that help, knowing who actually does this for a job is really important. And I know we want to talk about cyber insurance as well as part of this, but if you do have cyber insurance, there's a hotline you can call. There's a whole team of experts that just do this day in, day out, making sure that you understand that support's available to you and knowing who to call.
And so if you are a small provider, you might not have an IT team. It might be you, the CEO. What should that response be in really layman's terms? Turn everything off? Pull the plugs out? What's the next step?
You really want to focus on containing the breach. So if it's a mailbox breach, someone's hacked into your account, changing your passwords, enforcing MFA, getting the threat actor out of the environment. Ransomware is a whole...
MFA is...
multi-factor authentication. We're going to do a lot of jargon busting on this conversation. But look, ultimately containing the breach, that's always the first thing that you run at. If you're a CEO and you don't have a team supporting you, and if you're not technically proficient, you're going to struggle through that. So you'd be wanting to get technical support. Most small businesses will probably outsource their IT to an MSP, a managed service provider, somebody who's an IT professional. So clearly making sure that you're contacting them. But as we experienced in Dane's scenario, it was actually the MSP that was breached. And so you're hardly calling the MSP for help when they are themselves the ones going through the incident. So this is where we see some of the challenges arise.
And sometimes they don't pick up the phone.
In your case, they certainly did.
So what's the real cost of a breach? Like, you obviously have to factor in, do you have to pay a ransom? Should you pay a ransom? But what's the cost of dealing with the regulator and the legal cost? And I did notice Reece turned up in a Ferrari today, so you're welcome.
It's my Monday car.
Yeah.
No, but on a serious note,
I'll pay for that.
The Australian Cybersecurity Centre, so they manage Australia's cybersecurity, and they collect a whole heap of data every year around lots of incidents that get reported through to them. They actually came out with a report 2 weeks ago And they've seen that the average cost for a small business is $56,000 for an incident. For a medium-sized business, it's $97,000. And for a large-sized business, it's $200,000. Now, you might think they're big numbers, but I can tell you that's probably a tenth of what the true costs are, because that's very likely small businesses self-reporting what their costs are that they incurred.
As
There's
an
a whole
external
lot more to
cost,
it.
not your own internal
Exactly.
lost
That's
revenue,
probably the money that they've lost out.
productivity.
Exactly right. So if you are wanting to kind of normalize this for your listeners, small business incidents could cost anywhere between 50 to 150. For larger incidents, we've seen them cost, into the single digit millions, if not the tens of millions. And if you look at those very, very large incidents like Medibank, they self-reported to the ASX that incident cost them $100 million just to get through the first. I think the problem is when you see those big numbers, you lose the audience, right? They go, well, we're not going to lose $100 million. We don't even turn over $100 million. There's no point in discussing that. But I think for a small business to lose, say, $200,000, that for them is the equivalent of $100 million for, an ASX listed organization.
But I think the other thing too is, for us, we spent, a business partner and I, the best part of 6 months primarily dealing with that and not much else, and 12 months dealing with it.
Yeah.
And the cost of time and
distraction,
emotional energy, like, you feel like you've committed a crime, right? You've been the victim of a crime, but at the same time, you have to, in our case, we had to prove to our referrers and partners that refer their clients to us that we dealt with it properly, because the provider and the NDIS provider, we're dealing with how many government agencies do you think we know? 20, 30, 40?
Yep.
The stress and the lack of focus on actually running your business properly is extremely stressful. It's tough.
It is, yeah. And I think that's the hidden cost. So if you ask me how much this cost on, a balance sheet, hundreds of thousands of dollars, but the under the surface stuff is your business leaders and your staff who are frontline and dealing with this. It is stressful. So we get people quitting, we get people leaving, and that always has an impact on your business downstream. 6 months later, as you say, you're distracted. So you're not actually out winning work. You're not out servicing work. And so you might get through the incident and be okay, battered and bruised, but then where it really hits is 12 months later when you realize you've got no pipeline.
Yeah, you've lost 12 months worth of progress.
Lost 12 months of progress.
Yeah.
In our case, we probably strengthened the relationships we had with a lot of our providers because of the work you and your team did, and we did it by the book in terms of response. And I think in the end, a lot of the providers saw that, hey, you've actually dealt with this really well, really professionally. Sorry you went through that.
Yeah.
But the first 6 months is you're under the microscope to show that you are dealing with it properly, because equally the providers have a responsibility too.
And I think this is where people forget in the allied health space and aged care health space, for example, is you all operate in a very interconnected ecosystem where a lot of providers sit around each other. So for example, you've got your direct obligations to your customers, the individuals that you help, your employees, but then you've got funding arrangements either with the NDIS directly or with other referrers. You've got contracts, upstream suppliers. And when you go through this incident, it's not just your problem. It's also all of their problem to be able to deal with. And that's why you feel that pressure. That's why you feel that under the microscope that you discussed.
I reckon that the response I got was one of two things. It was either, how could you let that happen, from people who hadn't had to deal with one themselves, or I'm really sorry you have to go through that. We'll work through it with you, but you've got to deal with it properly. And that was from people who had dealt with it
before
themselves, and it was a real stark difference. But I think in the end, everyone was very reasonable, but you have to prove that you've dealt with it properly. And that was tough.
Yeah, I had the experience of being an employee at Uniting Care Queensland at Blue Care when we had the cyber incidents there, and it was a dramatic effect too on the client, that we lost all systems were out. You had home care clients, and you're all online, no longer paper-based. And it's that loss of time and stress for the clients as well. And so in your instance, Dane, your IT provider was the one attacked.
But it was our data.
Your data
breached,
and then your clients, obviously, and your other providers are linked. So it's a kind of an octopus, how we're all connected, right?
That's exactly what it is. And I think just coming back to your point about your own experience, what you hear from a lot of employees is, whilst it might be, some people actually quite enjoy going through a cyber incident in some respects because you come together and you try to solve problems and, you feel like you've got a common purpose there. Then at the end of the day, you skip forward 6 months and you realize you just got 6 months of work that you haven't done. You've got to back it up and do overtime and get it sorted. You also see a lot of, people typically at the C-suite probably not acting in their finest moments. They might be stressed, so they yell or they swear or they scream or whatever it is, and their employees just get jack of it and leave. And so
you see a lot of that from you.
We see a long tail to these incidents. I always like talking to people 2 years after a breach and say, hey, how are you going? Because, you'll still feel in some respects the trauma or just the shadows of the past and years on after the event.
Yeah, I just blank it out.
It's a good way to deal with it.
Suppress that memory.
In terms of, I guess, the average lost time when there's I know every attack's slightly different, but when there is an attack, would you estimate how long is it till you can have systems back online again?
This question comes up all the time. Day one, which is how long we're going to go through this for. Look, ideally you want to try and stabilize the incident and get it, systematically back online within, 1 to 2 weeks. That's still a long time, by the way. Time slows down. You feel like that's months, but it's, 1 to 2 weeks. And then the usual life cycle is at least another 1 to 3 months thereafter. If you're dealing with it 90 days on, then that's a larger incident. So that's why you get, incident responders come in to try and just like shortcut that time frame. But still, 3 months is still a long time in a small business.
Amazing.
But the reality is to answer that question is you don't know until you start dealing with it, right? Like it is, how long's a piece of string? And
obviously, the more severe the breach can go on for months. I mean, you look at some of the ones that are going through the courts at the moment, we're in 2025, and now the courts are only just starting to deal with some of these breaches that occurred back in 2022 and will continue to do so for the next few years. So, 8 years after the fact.
And I assume it's evolving, right? Every attack is getting more complex. The AI, I'm sure, is helping the criminals as much as it's helping us. Is it getting more sophisticated?
It is. AI comes up all the time. It's the favorite buzzword that everyone's talking about in lots of different contexts. But in our world, what it's doing is it's helping attackers scale so they can actually launch more attacks more efficiently, less costs, less barrier to entry for these cyber criminals. They are appearing more legitimate. So we talk about phishing emails at a very simple level, able to draft emails that sound like somebody in Australia. At the same time, though, the defenders are getting better. Also, their tools are getting just as good. But I think this is a quote that everyone in our world kind of uses is cyber criminals only need to get it right 1% of the time, whereas defenders need to get it right 100% of the time. And that's the challenge. It's that trying to mismatch what are very sophisticated threat actor groups with very sophisticated tools and resources against small businesses. And I think that's the challenge for our sector.
Our breach that we dealt with, it was through, like we talked about before, it was a managed service provider that we'd used for a long period of time, and they had their system breached. And through their system breach, they accessed our data, which for a long time I felt pretty hard done by in that circumstance. But how common, for the aged care and NDIS audience that we have, how common is a third-party style breach where you may not have done anything wrong? In terms of, our staff didn't click the link, our systems worked, but because we had a weakness in our supply
chain.
How common is that? Is that a common way that providers are breached?
It is. I think a lot of organizations over the years have actually done quite a good job of, cleaning up their backyard, securing their systems, deleting data, making themselves a less vulnerable target. And so the cyber criminals have looked at that and said, well, why are we wasting our time trying to attack people's systems directly? They still do that. But actually what they've done over the last 2 years is move into the aggregated businesses. So cloud service providers, managed service providers, law firms, because
there's been a few law firms get done too, hasn't it?
Absolutely. But I don't come on this podcast, throwing stones from a glass house. Our industry has its own problems too. But the reason is because they don't have to catch them all. They just have to catch one, and they get everybody a part of that process.
Broad.
So it is a common issue, and one that our national cybersecurity strategy is trying to address in lots of different ways, because we realize that this is kind of the weak underbelly for our economy, is these kind of service providers that ultimately are there to help lots of different customers all at once.
What can providers do, either contractually or technically, to protect themselves from third-party risks?
The first thing I'd say is, if you Google, the ACSC has a really good resource from way back in 2017 actually. They've set out a checklist of questions for you to actually go to your managed service provider and ask them. Very simple questions. How are you managing my network? How are you securing my network? What confidence levels do you have around what's in place? To give you as a business owner some confidence and understanding about what they're doing. Contractually, yes, of course, you can, pass through all the usual requirements that you would expect of them as if they were your own. Hot tip, look at the contractual requirements that your funders put in your contracts around data privacy and security, and copy them and put them in your own agreements with your service provider so that there's consistency. But fundamentally, a contractual requirement is only as good as the paper it's written on. Realistically, the issue is actually just not you having a meeting of the minds with these service providers because they're very technical and you're not. And understandably, you're outsourcing that to them because you're not an expert in IT. That's why you engage them to do that. So the takeaway message on all of this is for organizations, you have to have some level of literacy around this. You don't have to be an expert, but you have to be asking the right questions to give yourself the confidence to at least understand.
You've got an obligation to know your risk level or at least have a base understanding of how to mitigate that risk.
And I think also just really practical questions of just asking your MSP, for example, what's the state of our backups? Like if we got hit and our systems were down, how quickly can we restore? How confident are you that our backups are isolated from the environment that gets hit so that we can just plug out and plug in again? Have we tested that? What's the time that it takes to actually get that up online? Are we talking about days? Are we talking about weeks? Is it an overnight? How far back are we backing up to? If we lost our systems and had to back up to the last known backup, is that a snapshot from last week or 2 weeks ago? Am I wearing that 2 week of lost data risk, but I'm happy to live with that? These are the kind of basic questions.
When you think about like an aged care provider, like in Rose's example, you got rosters, you've got
rosters, client data,
huge organizations,
data.
With complex rosters where people are receiving in-home care, residential care. You lose that. That's a big chunk. Operational chaos.
Yeah.
And I don't want people to feel scared by this. Like I think what we're trying to achieve here is to demystify it and humanize it, right?
Yeah.
This is no different to me asking you a question about how do you manage aged care risk in other areas too? How do you manage, the delivery
clinical
of services,
risk,
clinical risk, patient risk, all those questions which require a technical understanding of healthcare service delivery. I'm not an expert in that myself, but I can come up with 5 or 6 questions that I'm sure will help get to the nub of the issue. In the same way, this is just how you need to approach it from an IT perspective.
And I assume if you have a managed service provider, you should be asking them what the response should be from you before it happens so that you can inform your own.
Exactly. Cyber insurance, I know we're talking about lots of different things, but one thing that I really want to drive home is that for small businesses, you're just never going to ever have enough money or capital or time or effort to be able to respond to these incidents. Cyber insurance, and I'm keen for your own views on this as well, but we've looked at this and unfortunately across our economy, the small business sector is heavily uninsured or underinsured, even if they have insurance, they don't have enough. 25% of small businesses have cyber insurance, whereas larger corporates, it's closer to 75%. And there's no rational reason why larger organizations have it, but small businesses don't.
I mean, I've a strong opinion on that, having been through it, is that I wouldn't operate a business in health, but probably any business now without it. I think there's 2 parts to it. One is the cost is exponentially of dealing with an incident is exponentially more expensive than cyber insurance. It's not particularly expensive. But secondly is what we found is that to actually get cyber insurance after you've had an incident, you have to go through or before, but you have to prove that you've got all the basic steps in place. Otherwise they won't insure you. So for us, it forced us to tick all the boxes. And then even after an incident, we actually got really reasonable priced insurance. So it forces you to get the basics right.
Yeah, sort of. Yeah.
And also it just gives you the peace of mind that if something does go wrong, and I think the reality is you're likely to deal with one in your career. I don't know if you agree with that, but from what I've seen and our experience, I certainly never crossed my mind pre-dealing with it.
Yeah.
But knowing what I know now, you're going to deal with it.
Yeah. When we started our firm at the start of the year, there was a period where we just had lots of computers and empty desks and no one operating in the business. And I quite literally said, we're not turning these computers on without cyber insurance, because I just could not ever operate. And maybe it's because I'm biased because of what I see every day, but I couldn't ever see myself operating in what I do without having that backstop.
Yeah.
And just as, I guess, a technicality under the Privacy Act, when does something actually become a notifiable data breach?
Or what is that too, by the way? Maybe we can start from the top.
So start from the top. 2018, the government introduced the Notifiable Data Breaches Scheme. It's essentially putting a responsibility on business owners to assess cyber incidents. And if it involves personal information, notify that breach to the regulator, the Privacy Commissioner, as well as to individuals whose information is at risk, so that they can take steps to protect themselves against misuse of that data. The challenge in Australia is it actually doesn't apply to a huge raft of small businesses. So there's a unique carve out where it doesn't actually apply to businesses with revenues of less than 3 million. That'll change. So if you're listening to this and you're a very small business or a micro business, just know that whilst at the moment this might not strictly apply to you, that will change in the next couple of years. But of course, to your point, it doesn't matter how big your business is. If you're a health service provider and collect health information, it's going to apply. But to answer your question,
because health information is automatically considered high risk, right?
That's right. Exactly.
And what do you, like health information, is it just the client database that says that they have a home care package, or is it the detail behind, that clinical file?
It's typically the detail behind the file itself. So, health conditions relevant to that individual, but it's very hard to distinguish the two. So we experienced this in our incident together, which is you might have basic contact information about an individual, and whilst it might not say list their healthcare needs, we know that they are themselves receiving healthcare services. And so the mere association of their contact information with the entity being breached was kind of enough to be able to trigger having to report to them. And so I think, this is another issue, which is it's not just your crown jewels, it's kind of everything that relates to your customers that, would be potentially considered notifiable.
And I would imagine in a lot of these attacks, you don't actually know for sure what level, particularly in the initial stages, has been breached in terms of your data.
Yeah, it's a fact-finding mission. And interestingly, only about half of the incidents that we deal with are actually notifiable. Not every cyber incident is a data breach, and not every data breach is necessarily notifiable. But that's where you need that extra support to be able to give you that kind of guidance so that you know exactly what you need to do and not do. And
it's legal advice, right, at the end of the day?
It's legal, but it's also people that do incident response day in, day out and kind of understand where to focus. But I think, we experience this as well, Dane, which is you might come to a view about whether it's notifiable. You might come to a view about where the risk sits. But if you've got funders looking over your shoulder, they're going to have a very different view, and their risk tolerance is probably going to be much lower, perhaps, than yours.
And rightly so, by the way. Not this isn't criticism, but there certainly was pressure from a number of providers to prove that we'd dealt with it to their satisfaction. There's a period there where that was very difficult. We were meeting with a lot of our key relationships, and you're under the microscope.
Yeah.
And Reece joined me on those and explained our response from a technical point of view. And you're not dealing with our regular contacts, you're dealing with CIO type roles who have technical knowledge. And if I was to have to explain that on my own,
you lose credibility pretty quick. And I think that's actually a really good point that you make, which is you might have a relationship with, your clients, your customers, your businesses, whoever. But as you say, I guarantee you when something goes wrong, you're not dealing with them. You're dealing with somebody you've never dealt with before who doesn't care who you are, doesn't care about the business that, you do. They have things they need to check off and answers they need from you.
Yeah, well, they've got responsibility to their provider registration, to their clients. If we just shift to solutions, what are the controls or actions that a provider can take that are going to make the biggest difference?
The first is simple but effective backups, making sure, as we said, you've got good backups that are tested and that work.
And you're following up to make sure that
they are meant to operate as intended, right? We actually noticed a big shift in 2020, 2021. A lot less organizations were paying ransoms. And everybody was asking why. And it's because a lot of organizations actually just focused on having good backups. And even in an incident, sometimes we get called in when we know someone's broken into the house, but we don't know where they are and we don't know if they're about to encrypt systems. And the organization says, what do I need to be doing right now? And I said, you need to go and get your backup sorted right now. Stop this call, go get your backup sorted, because if they detonate, I need to know that we can bring you back online. So backups is the first. Good passwords and not reusing passwords. So a really good example is if you've got people who are accessing critical parts of your system, it could be your CRM or your patient management system, it could be your finance system, anybody that has access to those systems that are really critical, making sure that they aren't recycling passwords for those applications across other things that they log into, having a password manager so that it's unique to that particular application. So I personally have a password manager. My bank account password is very different to my email account password, is very different to everything else that I use just to sign up to, mailing list and whatever else.
Is that common, or would you say most people repeat passwords?
I'd say everybody repeats passwords. I think put your hand up at this table. Put your hand up. I didn't see your hand up, Dane. You're either lying or very good at cybersecurity.
Doesn't do it anymore, maybe.
Yeah, correct.
I learn usually the hard way. In
Yeah,
life,
yeah,
Rose,
yeah.
And we learnt the hard way.
Yeah. So Password Manager, that's an application that
It's a
supports-
tool that you can store passwords on, so that you don't have to remember that complex password.
Mhm.
It allows you to log in and be like, what is the password I use for that really unique bank account that I only log into, 3 times a month or whatever it is, and ensuring that that's different to, say, your common passwords that you use for your Facebook account or your, whatever it is that you log on to for social media. So keeping that really clear. The third thing is, I'm going to get a bit technical here, patching. So on your phone, you have to update your software. It says, please plug into, that power overnight and update your software overnight. That is essentially Apple saying to you that our software has a bug in it and we need to fix it. So update your software. This is the critical vulnerability. That's how criminals get in. They don't hack in, they log in, and they log in by having these vulnerabilities in systems. And so it's a long way of saying, again, for the non-technical folk, go back to your MSP and ask them, are we patching critical vulnerabilities in our software regularly? What's our cadence around that? Because what we see is in incident response land is there might be a vulnerability that gets notified by a particular software provider, and we literally see it get published online, and then the next day 20 clients call. And I'll say to them, do you use this application? Like, how'd you know? And I say, because the threat actor is using that vulnerability and just rinsing these systems. So patching. MFA, we talked about multi-factor authentication. That's making it that little bit harder for somebody to log in. It's having a one-time password that goes to your phone or to your email to prevent the criminal, even if they guessed your password because you've reused it or because it's easy to guess, unless they've got that second authentication ability, they can't get in. So MFA. And then the last one is, don't forget that a lot of these come back to the human firewall, what we call the human firewall, which is training your staff to spot those emails, training your staff to not send sensitive information over emails without password protecting it, all the really basic stuff. They're my top 5, and they probably account for 80% of incidents.
So that was the backups, passwords, patching, which I think in layman terms mean updates when required. Your multi-factor authentication, as painful as that always is, having to that second layer, and training for your staff around what a dodgy email could look like.
And look, it's obviously you can't always have perfect security, but if you did those 5 things regularly, I'm pretty confident that you'd be able to catch most incidents and take yourself off the list of
easy targets.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Both Rose and I are board members of aged care providers. From a risk and governance perspective, if we shift to the governments of NDIS and aged care providers, what should boards be looking at? How can a board, obviously a board's not day-to-day involved in managing this stuff, but what are the questions I suppose board members should be asking to feel comfortable with it?
And it's the same problem that we kind of discussed from the CEO or the small business owner not having that literacy. At a board level, your obligations are very different, as you mentioned. It's essentially the good governance and the running and the health of the company itself. There's a lot of different standards that your industry can point to. For example, in the aged care standards, there is a document which sets out the various standards of care across lots of different things, including healthcare service delivery. But part of that actually talks about the governance of the business from a data security and privacy perspective. So I encourage your listeners to look at that document. I mean, all that document does is just encode or enshrine, these broader obligations around cybersecurity, around privacy. But to answer your question, firstly, is your board or the audit and risk committee, does it have a standing agenda item to discuss cybersecurity and data privacy? And if it doesn't, well, that's already arguably a governance indicator of poor maturity. So put it on the list. The second thing is make sure that you're regularly discussing on a quarterly basis what are the latest things that are happening in our industry that we need to be aware of that are relevant to cyber risk. Now, that could be very specific, like are there any attacks happening at the moment that we can learn on of specific to organization? Or it could be very general. Have we had any major movements in personnel in our organization that, as we know, when people leave businesses or join, you lose a lot of that kind of working knowledge of how to run the business from a technical perspective, but you also lose a bit of that. They know how to operate the system safely, or they know how to log in carefully. It's all that kind of stuff. So just thinking really carefully around, is there anything that's happened in the last quarter to us that we need to be mindful of? And then lastly, just keeping on top of it. So, if there are things that you need to be addressing, particularly longer term projects around transformation or cybersecurity, making sure that you're actually, as a board, just checking in on those things and being accountable and responsible, even if you're not actually doing the day-to-day.
And are there potential penalties or investigations should you not be doing the right thing from a governance level?
There are. We've actually just seen the first final penalty be handed down a couple of weeks ago for a healthcare provider, and that was close to $5 million for a data breach that they had 4 years ago in relation to a ransomware incident. And the reason I raise that is because that's the first time that Australia, the regulator and the courts have actually said, it's not just that we're going to make you go through your paces in the incident response, we're actually now going to penalise the company for what happened, to send a message to businesses that there is a stick to this. The costs themselves were,
But how do you, obviously you're the victim of a crime, so you're being penalised for your lack of response? Is that, because that was one of the challenges I had, is you're going through the ringer, going through it, and you sort of going, well, hang on, I'm the victim.
I'm a victim here too.
Cyber criminal, Russian cyber criminals in our case.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously that's a large business if they've copped a $5 million fine.
They are, yeah.
But what determines, what did they fail to do that got them fined?
I mean, there's a lot of things, and you can look at you can Google it and find it yourself. There's a lot of detail, but the short point is it's actually less about the incident itself. It's usually the conduct leading up to the incident that they're trying to penalise. So in this particular case, it was actually all about, they acquired a business, and it was actually all about the lack of due diligence when they bought the business, but then the lack of follow-up once they had acquired the business to actually implement their systems and uplift their systems. So that was a big part of it. But you're right, like a lot of the time...
that is something that providers would have to be very cautious of, right? If there's a lot of
M&A, there's a lot of
in aged care, particularly at the moment.
Yeah.
And, that's potentially a good warning for a provider to go, hey, this is an area that we need to make sure in our due diligence, and then our handover and implementation of a new acquisition, we need to bring that up to speed quickly.
It's exactly it. And look, that's a big issue and something that, our industry needs to tackle more generally. But the other point that was really interesting in this particular case was their MSP had given them some pretty less than desirable advice around what had actually happened at the time of the event. And so the underlying thread that they're trying to pull...
Familiar,
sounds very familiar. It's coming back to your story. But the underlying thread, and kind of coming back to the questions you're asking before, is... clearly that organisation hadn't done enough to understand the questions they need to be asking the MSP to satisfy themselves of what had actually occurred. So these are the things that the regulators are trying to tackle. It's not necessarily stopping breaches. Of course, we'd love to stop breaches. That's not going to happen. Yeah. It's the conduct that leads up to that either leads to the severity or the occurrence of the incident that they're trying to address.
And clearly you can't plead ignorance.
No. And not in today's day and age. I mean, you have to remember as well, we've gone through... cyber breaches and data breaches have been around for years. I mean, I've been doing this 15 years myself, but I really feel like...
You're too young for that, mate.
Mate, I don't feel it. But the last 5 years, like, we've seen a lot in our industry and a lot in our country happen. I think that there's just nowhere to hide anymore. You can't anymore plead ignorance to this.
I guess in the aged care sector and NDIS, there's a lot of change happening. There's a lot of burden on providers. There's a lot of new things that we have to do from a governance level and internally. What would be the no regrets checklist? The 10 things every provider can start doing this week to reduce the risk.
10 things. I actually wrote 10 things down. So here we go. We talked about insurance. Get insurance if you don't have it. Absolutely get in cyber insurance. Go and get a quote today. If you can take one thing away, I'd stop at that, full stop. Secondly, if you have cyber insurance, meet the breach coach. So get the phone number and the policy that you call when something goes wrong, put it in your incident response plan and ask your broker to meet the people behind the breach. We didn't meet until 5 p.m. or 4 p.m. on a Friday afternoon.
No, it was a Saturday. It was a Saturday morning because we found out at about 6 or 7 o'clock on a Friday night while I was watching the young fella play rugby.
Yeah.
And then mate, we're meeting on Saturday. I went, oh, okay, righto.
But we could have had a free 1 hour phone call beforehand as an example if you had cyber insurance and made, that small amount of investment of time to get to know each other. And that would have...
You know what to expect then.
We know what to expect. And it might not have stopped the breach, but it might have meant that, we could have, I don't know, acted a bit quicker or focused efforts, whatever it might be, right?
So your cyber insurer will nominate a breach manager?
Most cyber insurers will have a panel of experts that kind of do all this for you and work with you and whatever resource you've got. So get insurance, meet the breach coach. The third thing is if you need an incident response plan, so you ask the question, where do you start with this? Where do you start in the first 24 hours? Well, that should all be in the incident response plan. So update your incident response plan if you don't have one. The fourth thing is test your incident response plan. So just go through it. You don't have to spend too long, a few hours with your leadership team to actually walk through and understand who does what. And a hot tip, make sure that incident response plan is actually printed and stored offline.
Clever.
Too often organizations go, where's that incident response plan? It's on the system. Okay, great. Can you grab it? No, we're encrypted. Okay, right. Fifth point is really simple. And you probably went through this yourself, contacts and contracts. So when something goes wrong, who are you contacting at each of your clients? Who in your contract do you have to notify? But actually, who are you calling? Do you have that contact list set out somewhere? Is it offline? Again, too often, we say, who are the stakeholders that we need to be mindful of in this incident? And you say, well, we've got all these different organizations. Okay, great. Let's start sending them emails and letting them know that this is happening. And the effort to even just logistically do that can be really difficult. So there are 5 things. Number 6, we talked a lot about technical controls. Maybe listen back to some of the points that I made around that to make sure you got that checklist, backups, MFA, patching, passwords, etc. 7, put cyber on your board checklist, as we said, once a quarter. Make sure that that is a standing action item, that you're actually addressing that on a regular basis. 8, staff up key people in your business, particularly financial controllers, like the person that manages your payroll or the person that manages your invoicing or accounts receivable. They're going to be naturally the target of these attacks. So make sure they're really staffed up on this.
When you say staffed up, you mean training, right?
Just trained up, know what to look for.
Know how to identify risk.
Yeah, know how to manage that. Number 9, you can actually subscribe to a lot of different free resources so that you don't have to be sleeping, losing sleep at night around this. So the ACSC has a really good resource you can subscribe to where they send you latest updates around what's happening. Cyber Wardens is another really good free resource.
Sorry, there was another acronym there.
Cyber Wardens. So they're an organization that basically provide free training and education for small businesses. So you can...
And the ACSC is? The
Australian Cybersecurity Centre. And number 10, make friends with a cyber lawyer. Sorry to be selfish here, but I have to put that in. We're not all that bad, are we?
Depends if you give me a drive of your Ferrari.
I have a Ford, by the way. I want to defend my honour here. I have a Ford.
So what mindset shift does the sector need to make from seeing cyber as an IT issue to seeing it's about how we build trust with our clients and partners and provide good care?
Yeah.
What's the shift the industry needs to make in terms of a mindset?
I think there's 2 answers to the question. The first is small businesses generally need to have a real big mindset shift around the fact that this isn't a big business problem.
It's a real risk.
It's a real risk. It's something they need to address. And
they need to get insurance.
They need to get insurance. It's all the things we discussed, right? I think small businesses, they play the averages game. They play the odds game, which is there's a probably 1 in 100 chance that I'm going to get hit. So I'm going to take a punt, right? But the challenge, and you pick this up, is if you do get hit, the cost, the losses, the experience is just so disproportionately weighed against you because you're a small business compared to the cybercrime. So the first is it's actually a small business mindset shift. But then the second is...
And small businesses are a risk to the providers too, right? So if a provider's working with small and mid-sized businesses who aren't cyber smart, they are a third-party breach risk.
Yeah, exactly. And then the second is more generally as health service providers, and it's no different. Like I wake up every day, wanting to, add value to my clients' lives and do good work. I am a cybersecurity expert because of the nature of what I do, but most lawyers that come into this profession don't think that they have to be cyber savvy. They just want to get in and do good legal work, right? In the same way, you just want to get in and provide good health service delivery, aged care service delivery. But unfortunately, it comes back to the point, we all have a part to play in this, and there's a real connection now between good data security, between good cybersecurity and good health service delivery. That dotted line is now a single line. We have to bake this into everything that we do as part of our overall role. So you're right, it's a mindset shift from that perspective too.
I think something you've kind of shared today is also that you might not be the target. It's a broad brush approach by cyber criminals, and you might be one of them even if you don't have the balance sheet that you think would be attractive enough for a criminal to attack.
And Dane, to your point, right, earlier, is you might not yourself be targeted, but if somebody in your supply chain that can access your systems or is storing your data on your behalf gets hit, you've got the responsibility to deal with it. So it's a very long way of saying this is a problem that unfortunately we're probably going to have to live with for the next, at least generation, if not 2 generations. It's not going away anytime soon. Cyber criminals make way too much money. Why would they ever give up the game on this? We just have to be better as Australians to kind of fight against that.
So if you wake up tomorrow and it's your turn to be a customer in aged care, what changes do you need or hope to see? Doesn't have to be cyber related.
I know, aging population, and it's ironic. I've just had 2 young kids, they're 3 and 6, but I'm now kind of dealing with the other end, which is aging parents. And I think it's a pretty obvious statement, right? This is a really, really important industry, and I would love to see just more investment in it. I would love to see more good people come into it and want to stay in it. Super important for the next 20 years for all of us, I think.
If you need to find a home for mum or dad tomorrow or today, would you be happy with what's out there?
I think the challenge is that there's obviously good, bad, and everything in between. I would like to think that no matter where they end up, that they get, the care and the support that they need across the industry, wherever it is.
So, Reece, if someone wants to talk to you about, you started your own law firm 12 months ago, Atmos Group. How does someone get in touch if they want to have a conversation about it with you?
Just reach out. We're very open. Add us on LinkedIn. Add me on LinkedIn. There's just lots of thought leadership. Just connect. I came on here to share a story and storytell. It's not here to, necessarily get people calling me. Just connect with me. There's always going to be opportunities to chat, whether it's at conferences or whether it's other stuff. Reach out. Otherwise, go back through usual channels. Speak to your MSP. Speak to your insurance broker. There is lots of help out there.
Reece, I hope that was time well spent.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, mate.
Thanks for listening to this episode.
If this was time well spent for you, follow the podcast so you never miss an episode.
If you want to support us, leave a review and share it with someone in your network who might get value from it.
Finally, a thanks to our partners who make this possible. Painters, your design and construction partner.
And Optum Allied Health, your physiotherapy and allied health partner. You can find the links in the show notes.
Thank you for listening. We'll see you on the next episode.